Um, just turned on the live stream on YouTube, but it's taking a moment to set up. Uh, Amy Joy is not joining us tonight. She generally handles this sort of stuff. Oh, here we go. Just hit allow. Let's turn that down. Okay, it was echoing me,
All right.
but I think we're good now. We have a couple more people who have to be entered. Okay, hopefully that was the right thing I did. Or maybe I should have recorded it to the cloud. I don't know. In any event, I think it just is recorded regardless. So anyway, um, welcome again, everybody. As I mentioned, Amy Joy is not joining us. She generally handles the technology and stuff. But she had another commitment tonight. She does a volunteer work with a certain organization that handles emergency response in New York City. So she's out doing something for a good cause. Anyhow, welcome, and maybe we'll just turn it over to Orlando.
Oh, wow. I don't even think that I am completely ready to talk right now. I've
Oh,
been in
okay.
class today all day.
Well, we could say hello to everybody.
No, on the receiving end. Um, uh, uh, you know, but speaking of big and big causes and things that are larger than us, I have joined Penn State University, and I am going to be studying environmental science and forestry.
Oh, great.
And I have been concerned over the years. Okay, let me see how I can say this because it all has to do also with poetry and with our, personal stories. But I think that sometimes life can take you into unexpected paths and journeys if you are ready for them. And I had, I am a little bit of a farmer at heart. I had a lot of farmers in my family. My father was a geologic engineer, then he became a politician. Our life was completely disrupted. We have to move into big cities, leave the farm. Anyway, to make a long story short, I think I'm making the return back to the land. And and it's something that brings so much joy that you have no idea. And it has also come at the right time, at a time when I had a lot of losses over the last since COVID. It was just a chain reaction of losses and people very dear to me that I was really not ready at all to accept. So all this is coming right at the right time and at the right place because I felt at some point that I just couldn't deal with any of that stuff using the usual outlets that I had, meaning creative writing and poetry, and so on and so forth. And writing for many years have been pretty much everything I needed to hold on to. Um, and it still is in many ways, especially poetry. But I also feel that there is something else that I want to do for the planet before I leave. And I made the decision to apply to Penn State, and I have been accepted. And I started my training, and I am happy.
Yeah, oh, that's right.
I am happy. And, I wanted to share that with you because I remember asking a professor at City College, Barbara Unger, and I remember asking her, "What about if I run out of ideas?" I was a young poet, and I was afraid of running out of interesting ideas to write. And she said, "You're never gonna run out of ideas because for as long as you are connected with things that are larger than you will always have material to write about." And I think that that is a wonderful way of looking at it, especially when we take into consideration that, as writers, we all come from a multitude and an array of very different, pathways and backgrounds and formal or non-formal education. And I think that all of that informs our creative writing practice and also our self-actualization. I think that the more we self-actualize, also the higher our reach in terms of our creativity. Now we have a lot more content to explore and create with. Okay. So on that note, I wanted to start today. Welcome you all. It's been quite a beautiful journey to be here with all of you, sharing the love of poetry. I uploaded materials to the cloud that I actually really hope that you're gonna be able to dive into it, and that will answer questions that you will have encountered already in your creative practice as writers. And it's just source material, resources that you can utilize. Okay, it's not the Bible, it's not the final truth, it's none of that. It's a very humble regurgitation of knowledge, and some are my ideas, some others are ideas that I have encountered in my work as a creative writing major, and then artist, and so on and so forth. And I just wanted to share all of that with you. On that note, how are you guys doing, and how is the writing coming along? I see exciting faces.
Yeah, feel free to jump in, if
Yes,
you've done
anybody,
anything.
please, please.
This is my first time making it to one of your workshops. Oh,
Okay.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Victoria.
Okay. I could wait.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, that's the problem. You all start at the same time on Zoom, right? I've just got a couple of poems that were accepted by a magazine, and I need to record them because they want an audio copy of them as well.
Okay.
But mostly I've been working in prose lately. I just finished the first draft of my novel last week. So that's where I'm at. I'm pretty excited about that.
That is wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Yes. And power to you. I think it's very, very, it takes a lot to stay writing and sane in the world that we are living in right now. So, kudos to you. That's awesome. And good luck and congratulations. Absolutely. And you said it's your first time. This is your the first class, this session
Yes.
today? Okay.
It's my first session with you.
All right. So there is a lot of material. You'll catch up. You can do the class at your own pace. There is plenty of material there. And, please, by all means, share, give feedback, and participate in today's class. We have been writing. Let me see. Let's just put, okay. Let me stop because I do want to hear from you. Anyway, so we have been writing following certain prompts, and you're going to find all of that in the folder where all the material in the cloud is being uploaded to. Okay. Who is next? Okay, Victoria.
I've been writing in the last 30 something days. I think I've written more than I ever wrote in 30 days, like quite a lot. I think maybe like 150 poems, and maybe a lot more actually. So I'm actually pretty proud of myself because I didn't write for almost 2 years. I just stopped after I got COVID twice. I got COVID twice, and then my mother had passed possibly of COVID. So I didn't write anything. So this is kind of a burst of writing for me. I've attended maybe about 40 events. Very long list of events, and I'm still going. So hopefully I'll just stop for a couple days and just work on trying some mastering.
Okay. Okay. You know, I can identify with that, and I'm not planning on, sort of tailgating whatever you say, but I just wanted to give you some support in that. I did also lose my mother to COVID, and my father, one after the other, and I couldn't write a thing for a long time, for almost a year.
That's very
And
weird you said that because I lost my mom, dad, and my brother back to back as well.
you know what I mean?
And I
So
was stuck.
I think that when that, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and she teaches also a hostess, and I was saying, I mean, sometimes what happens is like life, is bigger sometimes than anything that you can think of. And let me tell you, for me to admit that, because for me, I mean, writing an art is everything. It's the sum of all possibilities, so I find refuge in that ever since I was a child. So, but sometimes just life is too big and you cannot avoid it, and you cannot even try to cope with something else in the midst, especially of life-changing events like the passing of your parents. So it's okay, and I think that that's the time when you need to sort of be gentle with yourself and surround yourself with either aloneness or people that are silently there, you know. So thank you for
Thank you
sharing
very
that.
much. I'm sorry for your loss as well.
And thank you. I am also, very sorry for yours too. And I actually hope that that can serve as a motivation for you to write and honor the legacy of your parents. And thank you for sharing. Anybody else would like to? And also, I would love to, of course, hear your work. If you came with work that you would like to definitely share today, we're here for that as well. Okay. And why is Amanda so quiet today?
I've been sick. The whole family's been sick this week, so
Oh
I
my
haven't.
God.
I,
Okay.
I started to work on a poem about snow because I thought that we had we had a snow day, which we never get snow where I live, and we had an actual snow day, even though there was like this much snow on the ground. And the three responses to the snow was, I was like all hush because I love snow, and I went for a walk in it, which probably made me worse. And my son was squealing because he's like, no school, yay. And then all the other adults were like groaning because they have to drive in it. And I just thought that was interesting. So I was trying to work on a poem about those three different responses to snow, since we talked about that last week, but I didn't get very far. So
It doesn't matter, but it's a very, very good idea. I do like that, and the different combining different points of view, different responses to one particular topic, issue, theme. That sounds very interesting. Absolutely. And so that means that you will not be sharing, or you will be sharing something today.
I just have random lines, so I don't really have it.
No
I'm
problem.
sorry.
No problem. No problem. Listen, this is not I'm not grading you. There is none of that, right? So this is a conversation among colleagues, feedback, checking in. You have plenty of material. You're not here to impress me either. I don't care about that. What I'm here to do is to support you in your path as writers, in your evolution, in your commitment, to your practice. And that's why I put together that PDF that is a survey of poetry, from line poetry to meter to everything that can actually really stimulate, because sometimes I think it's a very good thing to dive into aspects of the craft. You have the content already, you are providing that. And sometimes, when you just dive into aspects and elements of the craft, that can be sort of like an extra kick and an extra motivation for you to try new things as well, which has been basically the theme of this workshop. So you don't get comfortable only writing in free verse. That you can group things in whichever way your poem requires, and we are here also to serve the poem as well, right? In that interesting dynamic between that gets sort of established between poet and poetry. And there is a kind of like give and take there, and there is a moment where the poem is sort of dictating its own structure, and that's the kind of stuff that I am looking forward for you to work with. There are plenty of prompts in that PDF material that you can work with as well, and plenty of references as well. So that's the important thing, that you continue to be supported in your practice. Okay. Anybody would like to share something? Connie, how are you?
Hello. Yes,
Hi.
thank you. Well, I don't have anything ready to share today, but thank you for asking.
Oh, you're very welcome. So that means that we're gonna write something? We're gonna be writing here. Let's look at does anybody else want to say something? Mention, check in. Erica. I have Erica and PJ here, right?
I'm personally curious about arrangement of lines. Like sometimes that gets me stuck. Like, okay, how do I sense what should be my opening line and like the transitions?
I think that is something that it's not something that you can actually, in my experience, and in the experience also as an editor working with other writers, it's not something that you can just do right away. I mean, I think there are different ways of approaching that, right? I mean, let's say that the most rustic and simple way of defining poetry is a different way of using language, utilizing lines to express feelings, emotions, and thoughts. Let's say that that's the most rustic and basic definition of poetry. But once you start working with that content, one thing that happens with poetry is that poetry, I think, is one of those art forms in creative writing that has as much to do with sound and voice as
So I
it
should look
does.
at it. So are you saying when you say sound, are you saying look at it like it's maybe a musical piece and
Yes, I think that you need to
okay,
read it a lot.
okay.
And I think that you need to read it out loud. And I think that you need to read it to others. And I think that then you will have an idea of how to break your lines. I learned how to experiment with that doing poetry readings, because I think that when you read, that kind of breathing dictates somehow the rhythm and structure of your lines, you know? Um,
If I don't have a
so
template, I don't know. That's my problem. If I don't have a pre-made outline, I don't know. It's like I'm just guessing
it's
what
okay to
line to
guess, but what I'm saying is, like, the more you read, once you have the poem in, let's say that you came up with a poem, and once you have it, do you want to show us something? And I can show you concretely But we could actually, let's look at a poem here. Let's just look at a poem that I have here. Okay. Let me see. I'm gonna share a screen here. Share screen. Poetry selection. Share. Okay. So you have that poem there, right? One girl, everybody sees it? Yes. Okay. So this is a poem by Sappho, the Greek poet, and there are very different ideas about this, if these are just fragments but whether they are fragments or they are the full pieces that the poet conceived, there is a structure that has been preserved or reconstructed as well after years of archaeological linguistics and trying to piece it all together. So anyway, so we ended up with this, and that's what we have. Like the sweet apple which reddens upon the topmost bough, a top on the topmost twig, which the pluckers forgot somehow, forget it not, nay, but got it not, for none could get it till now. It sounds musical. It sounds, of course, we're talking about Sappho, and that's meter as strict and the structure of the Greek poems and so on and so forth, right? But okay, so we have this is one, the first one here, like the sweet. Okay, so this is actually like one poem. It's kind of interesting because it almost sounds like a haiku. And I know that a lot of the old forms of Greek poetry are sort of also close in form and style to some of the old Japanese forms of poetry as well, right? So you can look at it in any kind of way, but definitely it's poetry, right? Now, if you were the poet, you have the freedom, depending on where you want to stress things, and most importantly, where you feel that the breathing tells you where to stop. And you could reconfigure this entire poem, the first one, without necessarily altering the content of the poem. Okay, so those are ways in which you could play with the structure of your poems. So you can go by your breathing. You can also go by your sound, by the rhythm, by the internal rhythm that the poem dictates as well. And you can also force, and it's okay to do that, you can force different structures to your poem. Okay, when I teach meter, like I was teaching a course in sonnets, right? In the sonnet as a metered form, right, of poetry. We have lost the ability to compose by ear as we used to, when poetry used to be oral and oral only, and it was recorded that way for many, many years. So that created that practice. And the bards, the poets, used to be very sharp at that. But we have lost that training. So I think that the important thing when you are also, which you're going to see in the material that I gave you, that takes you into different forms of poetry and how to work within different styles of poetry by following the structures of those specific formats. One thing that you can also do is, like I said, you can either go by the breathing, you can force structures, or you can rearrange lines uh, uh, at will, the more, I mean, this is a short poem, so this really doesn't lend itself to, to a lot of different permutations and transformations of this poem. But when you have larger, perhaps forms of poetry, like maybe another one that we're gonna see, you perhaps have a little bit more freedom to work with. But I can see that even here, if I wanted to, because sometimes the work with lines can seem a little arbitrary, and you also have to remind yourself that poetry is visual as well. So we're talking now about, that's why poetry is the most complex form of creative writing there is. It's much more complex than narrative. In narrative, you have a lot of freedom to express ideas. In poetry, you're really working within a very, I mean, I don't want to say it that way. I think that each form presents for the writer different challenges. Okay, so shorter forms of writing present other forms of challenges. And of course, when I write, when I wrote my full length memoir, that was quite a project, because then we're talking about real length storylines and so on and so forth, right? So, narrative obeys to other laws. But when we definitely talk about poetry, we also have to consider the arrangement of those lines as a visual effect as well. So there are various things that you can keep in mind in that sense, right? So that's the tip that I can give you. I think it's something that you gotta get a feeling of by you get the feeling of it by doing. It's just that kind of thing. It's like when you do gymnastics, or you swim, or you skate, or you rollerblade, or you ride a bike. You don't get too involved with how you're pedaling, but once you start pedaling and you get out of your street and into the mountains and wherever it is that you're going with the bike, that's when you really experience that freedom and that ownership of the piece that you're working with. That's what I can say. But yes, I mean, you can play arbitrarily also with breaking lines in a way that they can also make sense visually in the poem as well. For me, it's a combination of factors. I like to read a lot out loud poetry over and over and over again. And I'm one of those poets that, for me, I really spend a lot of time. I write, but then I really go and I can spend time, and that means sometimes years, working on poetry material to, create a book or whatever. But even one poem alone sometimes can take me a long time, because I think that one thing that as creative writers, and especially as poets, we need to consider two things. One of them is that we can never get confused with inspiration and the final product. Sometimes we land on the poem, and the poem is there, and it comes out, um, uh, at once, or it takes a short period of time to craft a poem. But I think for the most part, poetry is something that needs a little bit of seasoning. And I think it becomes more complex precisely because of all those layers. That's therefore the title of the workshop, Between the Lines, because also poetry is something that is kind of said between the lines, meaning there are things that mean other things. There is a way of disguising the obvious as well, right? We don't have to worry too much in narrative with those things, but in poetry we do. So all those factors play a role in the final creation of the poem, and I think that there is a point when you, as a poet, need to know that you are done. You need to let go and you sort of need the poem be, let it be. And you can always play with arranging lines and so on and so forth. Also, I was talking about the sonnets or other forms of poetry that obey to certain laws like meter and rhyme, meter pattern and rhymes and so on and so forth. There is an explanation on the PDF of each one of those for you to, regurgitate all that material in your work. So you can, when you are writing poetry, I think the important thing is that you get all that content down on the paper first, and then you go over, and then, but it's like write with no editing. Allow yourself to, don't worry about punctuation. Don't worry about, when you start writing, and just let that writing come out and season, and then you can always go back to it and do some, more rigorous self-editing, and then of course it's important that you also share your work with people that you trust. And in the case of poetry, for instance, I like I said, I like to read it. And then, I might just give whoever it is, a colleague or an editor that I'm working with, the piece in writing, so they can also look at what I've been able to create in terms of the structure, of the poem. And then, sometimes what it is like the person you're reading to has also the poem in their hands, and they will tell you, but you're doing something with your voice that is not really reflected here. Is that something that you want to do, or you rather go by how you should be breathing and saying the lines based on what you have written? So one will inform the other as well. The writing on the sheet of paper and the poem uttered, right? When you utter the poem in the air, and that has a materiality, and that has a rhythm, that is not just, metric or any of that. It's just the internal rhythm of the piece. And those are things that you can just play with until, you feel, you get a feeling that your poem has been accomplished, that is what you want to say, and how you want to say it, because the issue with poetry is not the what, but the how things are being said or structure and so on and so forth. That's why it takes time. I mean, poetry is something that really, I mean, of all the art forms, I would say again, it really takes, time to be developed, to
May
become.
I interject something?
Yeah, yes.
I could just sort of say something that's been helpful to me many years ago, like 40 now that I'm reflecting.
Yes.
I did a workshop with Derek Walcott when I was in graduate school. And one of the things that he really insisted on is that you should always write your poems in complete sentences, just like any other piece of writing. Like sentence fragments and like sort of these phrases that are not connected. He was really against, and I started thinking just the grammar of language. If you could sort of first kind of write in complete sentences and then consider the grammatical makeup of the sentence, you'll start finding that the lines will break at like at the ends of clauses or phrases or something like that. And like I was saying in the chat here, that first 3-sentence or 3-line poem we read, I could easily see turning into a 9-line poem by dividing each line into 3.
Yes.
but it'll be following the grammar of it, right? The clauses, the phrases, and punctuation and so forth. So that's my 2 cents.
Oh, I think that that is a very valid point. I definitely think that that's a way also of looking at it. I think that it's important that you have those we can call it complete sentences, complete thoughts, poetic thoughts, right? We're talking about the metaphors, we're talking about that, we're talking about the poetic image. What is a poetic image? It's really a metaphor that never comes back, right? It's an image in and of itself, a whole world. And yes, absolutely. But also what happens with poetry is that a lot of those thoughts can be really big and lengthy. Especially if it is a poetic image. So therefore, then the need to find where to break it, because one thing is it looks odd having a line that is too long, especially if the rest of the lines in the poem are shorter, and so on and so forth. So those are kind of considerations that you make, but after, in my opinion, the content has already been poured on the sheet of paper. After you have that, then of course, go. But I think that is a very good idea. In some of my latest collection of poetry, it's a lot of narrative poetry. So there are really stories. But even those stories, I found poetic ways of kind of breaking lines, and sometimes I had to do with I think that the logic of the poem started to dictate that. I created spaces, for instance, because I felt that, that line could just not be broken in the traditional manner in which, that line should have been broken. So I created, let's say, a bigger space because I felt that that space could create a transition, for instance, from one idea to the next, and so on and so forth. But yes, absolutely, I agree with you. It's the first thing that we need to worry about is just getting it all down in paper, and then it's time to play. Absolutely, yeah. Very much like a collage in a way. I mean, in the sense that with that you have those interesting and beautiful, complete ideas, but we are not just writing a poetic prose. If that is the case, then we can just write a paragraph, right? And that is the poem. And that's the vignette, or the poetic prose does that. But if we are working a little bit more with lines, and we want to get a little more creative with that and break lines where we feel that we're breathing, or so on and so forth, that's sort of like more of the artisan type of work that comes after, right? So absolutely. But you also want to make sure, as Jim says, that that those ideas are fully fleshed out before you start improvising with breaking lines. And I think that that's one of the problems that I find with novice poets, is that this, sometimes there isn't a careful consideration, because it's part of the, the evolution of your work and your craft. So you want to make sure that that when you start, playing with all those formal elements, that you are doing that to service the content that you're working with. So then, in that sense, structure becomes a form of delivery. Okay, you want the structure of your poem to sort of dictate its delivery. So you might want to structure those lines in the way you want your reader to read it. So that's the the tip or the recommendation, right? We have another one here we're looking at Sappho's work here, right? So we have the same thing, second poem, you know, like the wild hyacinth flower. This is actually a pretty beautiful a poem, and you know, Sappho was a very interesting a woman. Moralists tried to bury her and her work, but she was definitely a force to be reckoned with, and definitely very advanced for her time. She was very open with her sexuality and her sensuality and her erotic. She's probably the mother of erotic poetry, erotic poetry. And definitely there are all those very interesting references to the Greek gods and goddesses also, you know, in the midst of her poetry. This is one about virginity, like the wild hyacinth flower which on the hill is found, which the passing feet of the shepherds forever tear and wound until the purple blossom is trodden in the ground. You know, so it's a 3-line poem. Can somebody find a different way of breaking that? Read it in a different way, and you'll have then a different way of breaking lines there. Anybody wants to give it a shot? Yes, go ahead. Anybody?
I'll give it a try.
Yes, yes.
Like the wild hyacinth flower which on the hills is found, which the passing feet of the shepherds forever tear and wound until the purple blossom is trodden in the ground.
Okay. Formally speaking, how would you find a different way of breaking those lines? What does make sense, for instance, if you were to break the first line into two, let's say?
I would break it after the word wild.
The first line, like the
like the
wild,
wild. And
okay,
then break.
you'll have, and then you have down on the next line, hyacinth flower. So you start with like the wild, you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second line would be what? Hyacinth flower.
Yeah, hyacinth flower. And it could either end at found or it could end at passing, I think.
Right. It will create a little bit of deconstruction in the poem. I mean, if that is what you're looking for, if I were to read it that way, like the wild hyacinth flower, yeah, okay. I mean, see, we're playing with it. We're playing with it to find another way of writing it and of reading it, okay? And you can do that until you find what is best for the poem and what works better for you as well, you know? So, you know, you can experiment here. For instance, I would say like the wild hyacinth flower, I will break that line on flower. I would say like the wild hyacinth flower, and then my second line would be which on the hills is found, and then I would go to the third line and would say which the passing feet of the shepherds, and then I would break that line there, and they said forever tear and wound, and then would go to another line and say until the purple blossom, break it there, and then go into another line is trodden in the ground. And you still have more staccato lines in there, but they are still. And what happened when you do that is that you are asking for the reader to sort of speed up the tempo of the poem. Because the reader, if you do that, is not going to think that you want them to read like the wild hyacinth flower which on the hills is found. You know, if you're breaking the line somewhere else, you're basically also telling the reader where to stop. So he can get the meaning in the way that you want to convey it based on the structure of your poem. So we're talking about how we write poetry between the lines. So structuring is also a way of indicating your reader how you want them to read your poem as well. The intention that you had with those lines and how you wanted those lines to be broken into. Okay. But again, if you look at a lot of Dada poetry, Dadaism, a lot of it is like so surreal that it can only make sense on that kind of altered perception of reality. You don't need any mushrooms for that. You can just do that. Absolutely, I'm just kidding. But what I mean is like, in order, you know, to achieve the sort of alter reality, that sort of intoxicated state of mind, you can get that by listening to amazing classic music, or by just reading, right? And you can find very interesting ways of restructuring your poem. Some of them, you know, if you're bored with what is happening on the page, by all means, I think that then you need to start working with those lines and playing with them, you know, to find a different way of conveying the meaning in your poem as well. Does that make
I think
sense?
I think it's interesting. The first poem has these long lines, and then
Yes.
the next poem has these shorter lines. And I'm like curious to know what the poem actually looked like, the line length with the Greek, you know, letters, you know.
Well, that is a kind of almost impossible type of conundrum. Um, and the reason why I say this is because if we do that, then our haikus in English don't make any sense at all. Because the Japanese is a very different language. It's a tonal language, in which meanings anyway, so without getting into the linguistics of the Japanese language, it's a different type of structure, right? And way of thinking altogether. So that's another consideration. That's why the translation of poetry is extremely difficult, because it's not about just translating the meaning of the poem. It's about finding the form in which that can be conveyed in the target language. Sometimes the structure of a poem in one language, if you take the poetry of Federico Garcia Lorca, for instance, a Spanish poet, which I have translated some of his work into English and other languages. If you take his work, for instance, and you try to translate that into English, following the same structure that he has in his poems, is almost unreadable in English, you know, because the English language also obeys to, especially contemporary English, to other forms of structuring that are sort of a little foreign when it comes to terms of how sentences are woven in Spanish. You know, Spanish is a language that English is a language. The richness of English lies in its ability in its ambiguity and in the phonetic richness of the language. The richness of the Romance language is a little different. It's more structural. It's on these endless sentences that are all spiral, almost endless, and sort of like going on and on and on and on, and those sort of like spiral ways, right? There is no equivalent in the English language of that type of contemporary poetry, unless you go then to the Romantic English poets. But you know, that was extremely influenced by Latin. And as a matter of fact, a lot of them wrote in Latin and then made versions of those poems in English. So it kind of like obeys already to a different type of linguistic structure in that sense, right? It's an interesting way also of working with poetry. You can think of your poem as if you are working with that poem that you are crafting in English. You can look at it as if you were working in a different language and try to devise other forms of structuring to create a different way of writing it, and even of reciting it, right? So keep an open mind when you're working with that. One of the things that I give it a shot sometimes with I took a lot of risk in the my latest collection of poetry, because it's very narrative like, you know. So I read a lot of the narrative poets, contemporary narrative poets like Anne Sexton, Whitman, you know, you name them, right? So that sort of form, that sort of almost prose was what spoke to me when I was, you know, working on that book. And then there were other, you know, examples of, I have a few sonnets in there, or at least, yeah, a couple of them. I had an ode as well, which is a different form of structuring, and you can play with that. You know, like I said, in that material that I gave you, it teaches you how to write odes, how to write a sonnet. So play with that. Write your poems the way that your content is going to come out, and then force other structures, and you're going to be able to find other, you know, ways of conveying the meaning of your ideas as well. Does that make sense? Yes? Don't be afraid to experiment. You know, you can always go back and say, you know what, I'm going to keep this as traditional as possible because this is too much, and now it's kind of getting on the way of the meaning of the poem, you know? So sometimes you also want to do that. Like I have a lot of poems that are very kind of light, and when I have light poems that are not really too heavy in terms of their content and the topic that I'm working with, then I turn it into something playful. And it gives me a sort of sense of freshness, right? So you can do that, especially with poems that are kind of light. You can play with different structures and find different ways of um, um, reciting it and writing it down, you know. This is an interesting poem by Anne Sexton. It's written in stanzas. You can see them. The Ambition Bird. It's written in stanzas that only have 3 lines. And then 2 and 2 and 2 and 2. and she continues to work here then with 2-line stanzas, and then she goes back again. I do this a lot. I learned this from her. Anne Sexton spoke to me volumes when I found her work, and really kind of like put me in the right direction, especially with my desire to explore narrative poetry. She's definitely a master of the genre. And I mean, look at how interesting this poem is, and just read it. Read it as it's written. Anybody, read a few or the whole thing. Just read it as it's written. A volunteer. Anybody would like to? Yes, yes, Sarah. I mean, Shanna. Shanna. Yes.
Shan, me?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Shanna.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's all right.
Sorry.
Shan rhymes with Anne.
Shan. Yes.
Okay. The ambition bird. So it has come to this. Insomnia at 3:15 a.m., the clock tolling its engine. Like a frog following a sundial, yet having an electric seizure at the quarter hour. The business of words keeps me awake. I am drinking cocoa, the warm brown mama. I would like a simple life, yet all night I am laying poems away in a long box. It is my immortality box, my layaway plan, my coffin. All night dark wings flopping in my heart, each an ambition bird. The bird wants to be dropped from a high place like Tallahatchie Bridge. Sorry, it's bouncing around.
Got it?
Yep. He wants to light a kitchen match and immolate himself. He wants to fly into the hand of Michelangelo and come out painted on a ceiling. He wants to pierce the hornet's nest and come out with a long godhead. He wants to take bread and wine and bring forth a man happily floating in the Caribbean. He wants to be pressed out like a key so he can unlock the Magi. He wants to take leave amongst strangers, passing out bits of his heart like hors d'oeuvres. He wants to die changing his clothes and bolt for the sun like a diamond. He wants, I want, dear God, wouldn't it be good enough just to drink cocoa? I must get a new bird and a new immortality box. There is folly enough inside this one.
All right. Okay. Give me some thoughts or some impressions. What do you see there? What happens from these short, almost staccato, short lines in these 3-line stanzas? What happens from there to when the poet gets to the couplets? Couplets are the 2-line stanzas. When the poet gets to the couplets, and then the lines become longer and the ideas sort of start to become fuller, right? Look at how interesting. I mean, to me, when I'm reading, she's talking about how she's insomnia, she can't fall asleep and so on and so forth. And this has almost like that rhythm, that sort of almost again, brings me back to that kind of staccato, that almost agony. So it has come to this insomnia at 3:15 a.m. The clock tolling its engine is almost like desperate, like those like short lines, almost like you can't breathe much, going in that staccato from one to the other. And then when you get to, so she's finally going from there, and now she's really getting into that zone where the ideas start to flow, and that is when those couplets start to take over, and they do take over until the end of the poem, that she goes back again into those uh, 3 lines to sort of resolve successfully the poem from a structural point, kind of like the way she started it, right? But there is definitely a difference in the type of breathing that you feel as a poet, moving from these 3 line stanzas to the couplets, right?
I see the poem starting out kind of and ending with, reality, and then kind of in the middle when the lines lengthen and the stanzas become shorter, into couplets. It's sort of like flights of imagination,
Yes.
and then she kind of comes back to
Back to
reality
reality, to the off.
Yeah.
I am awake and I'm an insomniac and I'm a mess, right? Like she was. Unfortunately, she was a mess. Lots of issues there. It's
She was
extraordinary.
also drinking a caffeinated drink while she's trying to sleep.
Yes. Well, she was known also for that as well, and the pills, and and the alcohol, and she was highly medicated. I mean, very, very heavily medicated too for many years, and long stays in mental institutions and so on and so forth. So kind of similar to Sylvia Plath, that other amazing, extraordinary poet that writes in this kind of style too, this intimate and conversational tone. So, I think sometimes as poets, we find a lot more of a guidance, if you wish, for our own poems when we study other poets. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I always felt very frustrated sometimes trying to convey this to writers that are learning or playing right with the art of poetry, playing with structure and content and putting relating one to the other. So I think that the best company that you can have for this is not the academic analysis, but rather draw from the experience of other poets, and see also, it's okay if you see a poem that you like, and you see if you see a poet that you like, and you see that the poet is doing something with that a poem that takes you places, not only in terms of content, but also in terms of structure, use that as a model for your writing as well, and try to reproduce somehow a similar structure to get closer to what you want to say in your own poem. Does that make sense? I think that as writers, we are hung up on the idea because we've been told that we need to be original at all times, that we need to really come up with something that, and doesn't have to be that way. When you look at music, music is also part of poetry. It's also part of the same genre, as a matter of fact. In traditional, poetry contests, it's poetry music, and it's sort of criticized. It's sort of judged that way too. And in a lot of contents, they're open for poetry. They're also open for lyrics, and it all falls into the same category. So it says something, again, about the rhythm, about the structures, And those are things that have already been invented. All we can do with that is to play around with them. But I mean, in how many ways can you really, write a poem down? I mean, these are already formats that are the canon of poetic discourse. So what we can do with that is we learn how to read as writers, and what that means is you suspend your disbelief and you read and read and read, and you write and write and write using some of those poets that you admire, or poems. It might not be, there are poets that I wouldn't read a lot of them, but I like some of their poems, like Russell Edson, Edson Russell. So that's a good way of finding the middle ground in there. Go to other poets and see how they are finding solutions to conveying their content. How is it that they are doing this? Like Anne Sexton is doing it. This can serve as a kind of model for you. It's called modeling writing. So that way, what you do is like you see something that you like, and you kind of try to apply that to something that you're working on and see how that works. She didn't invent the couplets. She didn't invent the three-line structure. That's a canon in poetry. What she does is she applies a form that already exists into her blank verse, and she makes something completely different, right? So that's the beauty of it. Okay, don't look at form as something that is static. Look at it from a different standpoint. It's something that is more moldable, and that we are also in the 21st century, so the sky's the limit with what you can do. Just make sure that there is a balance between how the poems looks on your page, how you read it, and how you want that content to be interpreted by your reader, right? So going back to Sexton's poem, you can see and you can feel that agony in those very staccato lines until, like Jim pointed out, you get to the couplets, and the couplets feels that really, really all that magnificent body of ideas just take off to come back again into that sort of, dark reality. So, yeah.
Well, I hate to interrupt because, this has been great, but we've kind of come to the time limit. It's a little after 8 o'clock. I want to thank everyone for attending. Please do stay in touch with us. We do a couple of probably three to four workshops a year. We are planning on doing something in May. The workshop leader yet to be determined, although we have an idea or two of who it will be, but we'll announce that. And please stay in touch. We have our social media accounts, Art in the Basin on Facebook, and Art in the Basin on Instagram, and Art in the Basin on YouTube. This will be, I think, available on YouTube at some point a little later when, the algorithm kind of catches up with the video and publishes it. And consider checking out our events as well. We do every other Tuesday open mic, as well as with featured readers. And we just had one last night. As a matter of fact, our next show is on February 6th. We have a poet and writer named Vilma Luce, who will be reading from her memoir, Heart of an Advocate. So do check it out. You don't have to be
She
there
was one of my students.
Oh, she was. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, she's really wonderful. So yeah, but
She's a wonderful human being, extraordinary teacher too, and absolutely a joy. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you don't have to be person in the Bronx, New York, you can always get in through Zoom if you, kind of look at our events from time to time on Eventbrite. There will be links to the Zoom. So you can always join us. Don't have to be there in person. We usually broadcast people who are on Zoom on a TV or a monitor in the cafe, and then we mix up live people and Zoom people during the open mic session. So do consider it. And thanks most of all to Orlando for his 3 weeks of very informative and I think useful information, informative discussion and useful information, which I hope all of us can go and apply. Do make sure that you download the materials that he's posted. Did anybody have any issues with accessing the Google Drive folder? Okay, because it is there now, and as long as you can get into the folder, you should be able to download it. If you do ever have any trouble, or if you just want to say hi or find out what we're doing, you can always also contact us at artinthebasin@gmail.com.
I
So
wanted
anyway,
to just tell you guys one thing, just a little quick thing. Try not to disseminate the material that I gave you too much. It's copyrighted material. I got some permission to use material in there and so on and so forth. And also because in all fairness, I think that you deserve it because you have been here, you put the footwork, and it's my way of appreciating your participation and your commitment to the craft. You can reach out to me if you want me to read something you've written, if you want some feedback, and I am there absolutely for you. No problem at all.
anything else? Anybody else want to ask a question, raise a point, tell us anything that we need to know?
And tell them to bring me back again so we can do more work.
Yeah, we'll have Orlando back in some capacity as a reader or as a workshop leader, I'm sure.
I would love to.
Anyway, thanks again,
I just
everyone.
wanted to say I really
Oh,
enjoyed this, and I just had a quick question.
Yes.
I missed the first two. I enjoyed this tremendously.
Thank you,
Orlando,
Erica.
do you offer other workshops, either through Art in the Basin or else?
Absolutely,
on your own?
I do. Right now I am working for teaching for the Bronx Council on the Arts and for the New York Writers Workshop. I'm faculty actually at the New York Writers Workshop as well. So right now in this moment, what I'm doing is a memoir writing workshop with the Bronx Council on the Arts. It's called The Magical Lives of Common Things, The Magical Lives of Common Things. And it's a very interesting workshop. And the next session is this coming Saturday. It's on Saturday at 10 a.m. via Zoom as well. Okay. Go to bronxart.com. bronxart.org, or look for Bronx Council on the Arts. It'll land you on the page, and there is the information there as well.
Thank you.
Okay, you're very welcome. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing you. I want to participate more in the Art in the Basin readings and other things, just to listen and to come. I have done this a couple of times, and it's a wonderful thing. I mean, one of them was actually in that reading that that you invited me to, Jim, and you had then later on like an open mic, and I stayed there. It was an open mic through Zoom,
right,
and it was an amazing experience as well. To hear people that are reading from other, parts of the world sometimes. And it's just an amazing opportunity to check in with other poets that are, working from elsewhere as well.
We always we're known for being a supportive environment. Nobody's here to judge you,
Absolutely.
It's always we've had really great luck with the people who've joined us for these events, either the readings or the workshops. So please do, come back. And I guess maybe with that, we'll say good night, and we'll talk to you all, I hope, again soon.